That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. Volume 15. Part 1. Prologue. Scorched Dragon vs. Storm Dragon. For Veldora, this day could only be described as the Day of Doom. Empty plains. In response to the Imperial Army, the metropolis has been isolated into a maze. It was because of this that the beautiful woman who flew from the sky became extraordinarily prominent in the image. Sister, sister. An involuntary expression on his face, Veldora muttered. The voice seemed impotent. This is an unimaginable state of affairs in the eyes of those familiar with Veldora's usual words and actions. Cherries asked as he opened his mouth to Veldora. Hey, is that your sister, Lord Veelgrind, as rumored? Well, exactly. That's my sister, one of the strongest true dragon species, the Scorched Dragon. Veelgrind. On hearing this, all those who remained in the control room immediately acted. Emergency alarms were sounded inside the labyrinth, and someone went to press for a maximum alert posture for use against the enemy. Wait, Master. What can we do without Rimuru? Ramirez panicked. She's not usually of much use, and she can't do anything but make noise at this time. If you do your research, let's not say that Ramirez has no chance at all in the fight. However, Ramirez had reliable companions. The still methodically moving maze keepers, the Thraney sisters, and the tree spirits under their command. Beretta was also there. Although Beretta had stepped back from the position of the 10 Lords of the Labyrinth, his position of the Labyrinth Chief was unchanged. Not to mention, half of those trusty Labyrinth Lords were caught in the sleep of evolution. As former Chief of the Labyrinth 10, this was the time for Beretta to be working to guard Ramirez. It doesn't look friendly. Let's meet in the maze. The Thraney sisters had already grasped the situation of the various classes, Beretta said after confirming that information. There were only 4 Dragon Kings left in the 10 Lords of the Labyrinth. Ghidorah, though also awake, had already rushed to the armed nation of Dworgen with the Floor Guardian Colossus as reinforcements. Although it was not reassuring to take on Veelgrind, even this kind of battle power should be able to stall for time by using the perfect fortress of the labyrinth, which was the basis for Beretta's suggestion. In response, Veldora nodded. I don't know what she's here for, but it's ridiculous to come alone. There's nothing to be afraid of when everyone's at it. Quah. Pretending to laugh forcefully and say so, in fact, Veldora's expression twitched. He was afraid. Just the day before, Veldora had been tossed around by his eldest sister, Velzado. The memory is still vivid, but this time it was the second sister, Veelgrind, who single-handedly invaded the capital city of Rimuru, the capital of the Jura Tempest Federation. The situation seemed outrageous to Veldora, who was desperately trying to find a way to get through the situation. That's why he immediately agreed to Beretta's proposal. Just then. Veldora, if you're a good boy, come out and be honest. Veelgrind in the screen swore so. Incredibly, her sight pierced the screen and looked directly at Veldora, causing him to stagger. Her voice, transformed into an idea, conveyed to Veldora. Lord Veldora? Cherries, yo, don't panic. It's a trap, and if I casually go out at this time, I'm sure I'll be screwed. Ha. Hearing Veldora make a humiliating statement, even Cherries showed a troubled look that he could not hide. Huh? Since it's Master who's being targeted, doesn't that not have anything to do with us? Ack. Ramirez, who wanted to flamboyantly dodge the crisis, was gagged by Veldora's hand and turned into a situation where she was reluctantly but nonetheless reeled in. Thus, the posture of total resistance to war took shape, yet. Yeah, aren't you going to come out? Stupid, still no different from the past. Well, then I'll give you a gentle warning for once. It was impossible to tell from the image what Veelgrind was saying, but the feeling she gave had changed, and all those present understood that. As for Veldora, who could hear the other's voice, it was even more so that she had already sensed what Veelgrind was up to. But. No, it's okay. Ramiri's labyrinth is constructed with a superior power that can isolate even the subdimensions, and it's hard for even me to break it. Right. As long as one is in the labyrinth, escape from Veilgrind is possible. While the maze might be damaged by the other side by a layer or two, Ramiri's repair power is stronger. It shouldn't be impossible to keep Veldora in constant isolation if she also lends her strength. Don't panic. As long as I join forces with you, no matter who the opponent is. Veldora had intended to state so, but could not get the words out. For he had witnessed the sight of Veilgrind generating a true red lance in her hand. Master, that's not good. If we don't, we might not be able to protect ourselves from the labyrinth. It goes without saying, Veldora thought the same thing. I know. Everyone, prepare for impact. No one doubted Veldora's words, everyone immediately and honestly put up a defensive stance on the spot. A violent onslaught then assaulted the maze. It's a lie, it's a lie. It is confirmed that the victims have spread to the 50th and 50th levels, and the upper levels are in a state of destruction. Alpha and Beta, among others, kept passing around damage reports. These facts caused the moment the labyrinthine safety myth collapsed. Right now. The thought transmission from Raimuru reached Veldora, who was in a great panic. Hello, how are you? At this leisurely voice, Veldora returned indignantly. Idiot, now is not the time to say such things. I'm in big trouble. Sister has her eye on me. Although she's still outside the maze, she's going to fight her way in if she keeps this up. If it's Raimuru, who can certainly do something about this situation. Embracing this confidence, Veldora waited for the other's response. But when I came back, I said, "Are you all right?" He had asked back in a worried manner. Hearing this, Veldora understood. Raimuru didn't have anything left now either. If there was anything left, he would have come straight back right away. Since Raimuru wasn't doing that now, it meant there was no way to get his help. So what? The naive thought disappeared from Veldora's mind. Since it was impossible to rely on Raimuru, it was a matter of doing it himself. He had that self-consciousness. I have to go out myself. At least it's better than just letting her go into the maze. It feels like I should be able to fight, Veldora thought so baselessly. Although he was very forgetful, Raimuru's cultivation was also very good. If you can survive that kind of cultivation, even if your sister, Veilgrind, is your opponent, you shouldn't lose, Veldora thought to himself. I take all the responsibility. Can you please find a way to deal with Veilgrind? Raimuru didn't seem to think Veldora would lose either. He will take all the blame, which means that no matter what destructive act Veldora does, Raimuru won't be angry. If you think about it further on this basis, it is like saying, show me the fruits of your practice so far. Besides, now that the words of please have been heard, there is only one answer. Banter. If you say so, then I'll take it all. Kwa ha 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 ha. With that said, Veldora turned his gaze back to Veilgrind. The session with Raimuru had brought Veldora back to his usual mind. He even felt himself calm down quickly during the session. I'll have to deal with her myself. With an easygoing attitude, Veldora responded. Master? Lord Veldora? Both Ramirez and Beretta looked at Veldora in surprise. Veldora responded with a valiant expression swept away by annoyance. Kwa ha ha ha. I don't want to fight my sister either. But since the maze is no longer working, there's no other way. But. Okay, cherries. The reason the maze does not die is because it is an isolated space that can be established. Since this won't work for my sister, I'll have to do it myself if I want to minimize the damage. As long as Raimuru is alive, Veldora is indestructible. So to want no sacrifices, one has to put Veldora out of action. In that case, I'll go with you. No, I'd rather not. Even though you've become stronger, you're still completely incomparable to me. It would have been fine with Zijin, but the others would have just held me back. It's a harsh statement, but it is what it is. And Veldora, too, is ready to come to his senses. The look on his face that he was now looking forward in awe even made one forget that he had that bare look just now. Is it all right, Master? It doesn't matter how. Both of my sisters, I feel horrible about what I've done just thinking about it. Never mind. I also grew stronger after meeting Rimuru. Receiving a disciple, perceiving his immaturity. It's not the same as it used to be. Kwa ha 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 ha. Forcing a smile on his face, Veldora livened up the mood by doing so, regaining his usual form. So don't worry. All you have to do is stay here and take a good look at my bravery. With this announcement, Veldora left the labyrinth alone. Veldora recalls past battles with Velzado. The big sister, who has not been seen for a long time, has given people the feeling of being powerful and unreachable and unbroken since the past. However, the Veldora of the past does not feel this aura. The encounter with Rimuru made his growth impressive. The greatest result of this is the acquisition of the ultimate skill. Watching Rimuru from the stomach pouch while being sealed has taught Veldora all sorts of things. Then he sensed it. Strength that makes sense only if it can be used freely. Veldora has a huge amount of mana, arguably the largest of any surviving dragon species. It was precisely because he possessed a greater amount of mana than his two older sisters that he was able to effortlessly occupy the corner of the strongest lineup. However, this is just pandering. Veldora knew. There are guys in this world who struggle to win to the end, even as underdogs. Rimuru was like that, and there were many such presences among his own adversaries. So did Hinata and Granbel, and Ruminus the Demon Lord. These people not only rely on strength, but also use various means to gain victory, and are a group of guys who are absolutely careless. In understanding this now, Veldora is different than before. The proof is that the matchup with Velzado, also no longer being run over unilaterally, can do the counterattack. Velzado is, arguably, a natural enemy to Veldora. A very bad opponent in terms of the phase nature of the force. Velzado, who was born before himself, had an upper limit of power that was completely inexplicable. Veldora, who only had a higher amount of mana than their opponent, could barely cope at best when fighting, unable to gain any advantage at all. Even if one fights seriously, victory remains hopeless. Since birth, Veldora has gone to challenge Velzado several times, but in the end all have been countered by each other. Velzado's frozen world is both an iron-walled defense and a weapon that seals Veldora's movements, storms, destruction, erosion, annihilation. All of these effects would have no effect in the face of an absolute stop. Fighting against such a terrifying sister, he himself managed to take a slight advantage, and even Veldora himself was surprised. I'm a good one. He generated such a mood. However, although Veldora was aware that he could control his own magic, Velzado, who was his sister, had perfect control over the release of magic. The difference in skill level between the two sides is too great to compare. The nature of Velzado's power is to specialize in the cessation of movement energy, deceleration. And this power does affect the win or loss between the two, but there is no doubt that there is an overwhelming difference of power between them. Being able to take on such a Velzado, Veldora's amazing growth has even been praised frankly by the opponent. Well, that's amazing. That Veldora-chan, who would only make a mindless fuss, could actually think before he fought. I'm sure it'll be fine without destroying you. Even if it is laced with some dangerous words, it is undoubtedly complimentary. Since there had always been nothing but fearful feelings towards his sister, the words still made Veldora feel happy. Having said that, the fact that he can't beat the other side still can't be changed just yet. So, what about against Veilgrind? Velzado and Veilgrind are basically not on par. In Veldora's opinion, either side was a sister who was not good at dealing with herself, and he honestly didn't want to deal with them if he could. However, the situation was such that he had to strike out. Sister Veilgrind is still amazing. That kind of attack that runs through the labyrinthine levels is obviously not something that can be done that easily. 1 or 2 layers can still be destroyed by brute force twisting the secondary elements. However, it was impossible to infuse the maximum amount of mana available to Veldora in an attack by running a plural class through such a thing in one breath. The key is the ultimate skill. If I want to have a serious fight with my sister, I'll have to use Investigation King Faust 2. Yes, if only to compare the amount of magicules, Veldora is above Vielgrind. At least better than being Velzado's opponent. To be able to think that way is because Velzado has crossed the mental barrier. The key to victory lies in how the power is used. Although neither side would move the real fight, the strength was undoubtedly higher on the Vielgrind side. But that's all in the past. Velzado is hard to beat because of her element, but not so with Vielgrind. Not to mention, Veldora now has the blessing of Raimuru, having gained the ultimate ability of the King of Investigation. With this power that would work against even Velzado, there was nothing to fear even if the opponent was Vielgrind. Veldora thought so. Thinking about it, Veldora suddenly had a dry spell. Qua ha 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 ha. Not necessarily losing yet. Anyway, the other party is a sister, so let me test my strength to the fullest. Having made his judgment, the well-conscious Veldora stood before Vielgrind. Keeping in human form, the two looked at each other in the air. A motionless standstill in the air is a very natural thing for them, the true dragon species. That's smart, you understood my warning correctly. That means you're willing to help me, right? Vielgrind asked happily so while staring at Veldora. However, the other side answered in the negative. I refuse, sister. I'm not my sister's tool. Please don't involve me in your sister's quarrel. It's a bit of an understatement to be implicated. It's just that you are willing to assist on your own initiative, and I welcome you as a companion. If you promise to help me, I'll not only teach you how to use your power, but I'll also make a big deal out of you. But I'll designate the place for the fuss. Qua ha 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 ha. I've already said no, sis. I'm also not the same person I used to be, having perfected the use of power. Also, there's no fun in just making a scene. I'm a mature adult now. That's a lot of talk. Am I pampering you a little too much? Well, in that case, let me try to see how much you've grown. Although the answer was casual in mouth, Vielgrind already had the intention of fighting, so it was natural for Veldora to enter into a fighting state. From the very beginning, Vielgrind did not feel that she could make Veldora obey her orders by mere verbal intercourse. Demonstrate strength and make the other party obey. If that doesn't work, weaken Veldora and then let Rudra dominate him. She will try to persuade, out of the tenderness of Vielgrind. It was for this reason that Vielgrind had developed a slight displeasure with the matter of the bargaining break, and that was why she had not hesitated to launch a surprise attack on Veldora, intending to weaken her brother as soon as possible, and then wait for Rudra to arrive to dominate him. However, the hand blade attack she released with her right hand was easily diffused by Veldora. Not only that, but the opponent returned the kick immediately. Vielgrind takes the kick with her left hand despite being upset. How? This kind of power, no matter how you think about it, is not a weakened state, is it? Vielgrind had always thought that Veldora had not yet recovered from the damage he had received from the 300-year seal. It was because she only knew the Veldora who always used his power to the fullest that she had developed the preconceived notion that her brother's present weakness was due to the influence of the seal. The offense and defense just now made her realize that it was wrong. You seem to have gotten better, haven't you? It doesn't seem like it's just words. I am invincible in my Veldora killing art style. Sister, you know your own powerlessness, blah, 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 right in front of my fist? Veldora wanted to start explaining, but Vielgrind didn't listen to his reasoning, honestly. Let's just say she has started to attack more aggressively because of the fire. The red lotus boarded up to Vielgrind's twin fists, as well as her legs that protruded from her long skirt. The dance-like attack became a majestic move that could burn the enemy to death just by rubbing it. Nevertheless, Veldora resisted. It's hot, it's hot, it's hot, it's hot. Although he ran around with a disgraceful look on his face, he didn't suffer much. I've taught you so many times so far, and it seems that you still haven't gotten better at the root of the problem. If you dare to say that you are invincible in front of me, you have to stop talking big. Even though the anger was as intense as fire, Veelgrind was still very calm. She had seen through Veldora not only fully replying, but also becoming stronger than she had expected. Troublesome still. In this form, I can't really do him much damage. In that case, even if Rudra came, he wouldn't be able to dominate him. Veelgrind's original purpose was not to punish Veldora, but to dominate him. As predetermined, Veldora will be liberated whenever the scales of victory and defeat are tilted in Rudra's favor. But for now, the most expected thing is for him to perform the duties of an important pawn. Continuing to shrink from the fight was pointless in the view of Veelgrind, who had generated the thought. The same is true of Veldora in this regard. Wooah! The clothes that Veldora was now wearing had been given to him as a thank you gift by Rimuru, such an important piece of clothing, only to have it burned because of Veelgrind's attack. If there had been more time, that garment would also have been stained with Veldora's demonic chi and become a part of his body. However, it was impossible to expect such a change in just the last few days. Although Veldora himself hadn't suffered much damage, his heart had been severely wounded. In fact, it was all Veldora's own fault, but he now felt that even if he took it out on his sister, he would have no problem. And this situation, for Veldora, was actually a blessing. Anger can dilute the heart of fear. No matter how much energy is poured out, the fear that has been cultivated over the years cannot be shaken. To Veldora, the two sisters were symbols of terror. It's simply outrageous to go all out for an opponent with such women. Now, however, he was free from this yoke. Even my own sister, I cannot forgive. Just feel my wrath. With a loud yell, Veldora freed the force. The next thing that appeared was a dark dragon with a powerful majesty. Seeing this scene, Veelgrind snickered, just the way I wanted him to. Huh? If you say something like that, you must have a limit. Looks like you've forgotten about it, so I'll reteach you the fact that you can't beat me. With that said, Veelgrind also transformed. Transformed into the deft and beautiful, true red dragon. And just like that, the battle of the monsters began. Chapter 1. Time of Despair. Just as Rimuru was preparing to infiltrate the imperial capital, the dwarven king Garzel Dwago was in the middle of a desperate battlefield at the moment. He watched intently as the beautiful incarnation of death scattered in the distance. Gravity collapse is theoretically infinitely more powerful. Do you think it can be defended with Legion magic? To put it mildly, it's not possible to have a magical strike force to defend with a magical support force. The dragon race is not something that can be summed up in danger. Answering Garzel's question was the Supreme Commandant's class at the military ministry. He had set up a formation here to await the arrival of Garzel, and was thus able to witness the final end of the Imperial Hybrid Legion. The soldiers were speechless in the face of an overly absurd tragedy. The war effort had been thwarted long ago, but they had not fled, so he must say something remarkable to them. In fact, they have all understood that even if they run away, there is still no future. If one's own death prolonged the little time one's family had to live, it was enough as a meaning to stay here, to still maintain the column, supported by such thoughts. The soldiers believed that the heroic King Garzel would not let them die in vain, so they swore allegiance to Garzel. Bearing the expectations of the soldiers, Garzel felt bitter. Although it is not visible on the surface, it has actually become a mess on the inside. We can't win, more than that, it's a waste of everyone's life. You want to surrender? However, the Empire does not allow such things, at least we have to show a certain amount of power before we can do so. The Empire will not tolerate subservience if it cannot be made to believe that the interests of drawing us in are greater than those of direct combat. Then, there is no other way to live except to resist the war outright. No matter how much sacrifice has to be made, one has to believe that these are not deaths for nothing. Quality is more important than quantity, but that's too much of a foul, so we'll have to go ahead and take her down. Hey, doesn't the king care about his responsibilities anymore? Idiot, isn't there only one enemy, so there's no point in even asking me for responsibility in this situation, is there? Ben's question made Gazelle laugh bitterly. With the enemy alone, Veal grinned, any strategic tactics were pointless, and it was up to Gazelle to open up a way to live. Ben was well aware of this and joked with him like this in order to relieve the pressure inside Gazelle. Sensing this, Gazelle's confusion dissipated. At this point, Henrietta came to report. My lord, the enemy seems to be more than just the scorched dragon, and behind it the scent of plural creatures appears to be performing some kind of ritual, and Lady Jane says that the great magic is part of the ritual. Gazelle nodded in response. The great magic cast by sacrificing 60,000 troops was used to perform some sort of ritual, and just by hearing that, one could tell that some sort of evil attempt was being made to make people not want to imagine it. Even so, it would be extremely difficult to defeat the key. Veal grinned, so the only thing that could be done was to defeat those located behind her. Want the troops to move? At Dwarf's question, Gazelle shook his head. A heavily armed strike force has poor mechanics, and a flippant move could be a target for magic. It was meant to rely on their thick shields to move forward, but none of that made sense in front of Veal grinned. So, the only way left is for the 500 Knights of the Sky to launch a special attack. It's not a good idea to reduce the defensive strength here, but we'll have to do what Gazelle said. Isn't that right, Lorf? Ben chuckled. Dorf scratched his head and replied matter-of-factly. That's disrespectful, Ben. You call the king by his first name, but you should behave yourself. More attention should be paid to the position. The lecture was going to go on forever, but Dorf grinned in approval again as if he had suddenly looked away from something. But this time, you have a point. In order to buy as much time as possible, one should avoid spreading the battle. Besides, we're the only ones who can easily fight the enemy, so we might be able to surprise them. And Henrietta didn't object. Lady Jane also said to come to the battle after convincing the elders. Leave the matter of the rear to Lady Jane, and come and make a fuss, as before. He waited for Gazelle's reply. These old companions, as always, haven't changed much. Willingness to work with Gazelle to overcome the current difficult situation. Gazelle laughed. Oh, what a bunch of idiots. The brief in charge of supervision is to hear what these really don't know what to say. Jane has been tending to the Gazelle group since the past and has given much advice. As the strongest magical mentor in the Dwarf Kingdom, she was very trustworthy for Gazelle to consult with. Jane will be angry, I suppose. Even so, Gazelle made a decision. Only, this decision seems to have come a little late. Oops, I'm just not watching for a moment. King Gazelle is a real pain in the ass. Just before Gazelle and the others were ready to go out of the formation, Jane arrived first with transfer magic. Jane, did you hear everything? Jane glanced at the embarrassed Gazelle and shook her head. I thought I would be able to have the look of a great king, so I can feel at ease. However, I won't blame you this time, there's no other way to fight with such a presence. It's because it's impossible for the nation to deal with it, so the dragon race is classified as a natural disaster. Well, that's true, too. Magic that humans can use cannot harm the dragon race. Just a moment ago, the tremendous magic that Veelgrind had used had long been beyond the ability of anyone to cope with. Even if all the people who can be called heroes in the human nation are gathered together, it is still unknown whether they can beat the dragon race. But that's not to say there is no hope. Jane put that hope out there. Just now, there was a contact. Your Majesty will send reinforcements. We'll take action when they arrive. Not much time has passed since I contacted you. Even the old me doesn't understand a bit, but it's true, it's a report from Vesta. After all, the people of that country, with just a word from His Majesty Raimuru, would have taken action. Listening to Jane's dumbfounded words, which contained a sense of fatigue, all those present could only nod their heads. That's right, everyone understood right away. After that, faster than they could switch moods, reliable reinforcements had arrived first. Suddenly, space distorted. As if wrapped in a huge cocoon, the few elite troops then showed themselves. From Gable came 100 of the flying dragons and 300 of the Kuranai, commanded by Gobia, making 400 men in all. Everyone had crossed the threshold of A-level, a battle group that was good enough to rival the Order of the Sky. Even more striking is a huge weapon. I've heard of it, but I didn't think I'd go straight to war without stint. That is, the finished form of the magical soldier? Exactly. It seems that naming the Floor Guardian Colossus statue is still reliable as a companion. Garzel certainly knew that this thing couldn't beat Veelgrind, but its majestic appearance could put the soldiers at ease just by standing there. So reliable. If it's a power plant, it should be able to fight a little bit like a fight. Unfortunately, there's no point in facing these things in Veelgrind, and if it's just catastrophe level, maybe something can be done. At this point, someone approached towards Garzel and the others in the session. Coming were the army chief, Gable, and the trio of demonesses headed by Testarossa, and behind them, Gobia and Hakuru. It's been a long time, Your Majesty Garzel. Somehow, instead of Gable, it was Testarossa who came to greet him. With a diplomatic license and a wealth of experience, Testarossa was already well versed in such occasions. Long time no see, Lady Testarossa. Thank you for the reinforcements. Originally, there would have been all sorts of questions answered by Garzel, and ritualistically, it would have been the norm for an intermediary to answer instead. However, now is not the time to count such things. Everyone understands that, so the war meeting was conducted without regard to form. The location shifts to the command post and cuts to the chase. Represented by Testarossa, who communicated the guidelines laid down by Rimuru, and then proposed the course of action to be taken here. Did Rimuru attack the Emperor directly? It's more realistic than a special attack. Is that so? Always felt like it was a pretty messy fight too. A thoughtful Garzel. Classes that have expressed approval of the improvement in the situation. Dwarf who struggles to think otherwise. There's no time to think about it. Since no one offered an alternative, Testarossa pushed the topic forcefully. Lady Veelgrind will be dealt with by us, so the others will go and stop the rituals that are going on behind us. No objection. Garzel agreed to the request for proposals. Since no other way could be found, the most dangerous task had to be left to them, he had judged. Jane raised questions. One moment, Lady Testarossa, will you, the primordial, defeat the Scorched Dragon? This issue has very important implications for future combat. Jane argues that Testarossa and the others can't win because Veelgrind is just that overwhelmingly powerful. There was no doubt that the three primordials were the most powerful, so it was important to make sure that if Testarossa and the others were defeated, it would mean that the fate of the remaining people had come to an end. Honestly, we can't win. In that case, we should take defensive action and not provoke the other side rashly, and wait for His Majesty Rimuru to succeed. Since there is no chance of winning, one should try to buy time. While Jane's statement sounded correct, those in the Rimuru camp had a hard time accepting the proposal. Unfortunately, that won't do. If Veelgrind is left alone, then she may return to the Empire to interfere with my lord. Carrera said firmly in her attitude. Although Rimuru said it was okay to leave it alone, she still felt the need to attract the other person's attention. More importantly, I'm not here to discuss a battle plan, but only to communicate it by order of Lord Rimuru. If we can help each other, we can discuss it, and if it gets in the way of the battle, I hope you understand that it's not something you can do. Hakuru, who normally didn't talk much, was a harsh opinion when he opened his mouth. It is precisely because there is no time left that we must unite our minds even if there is a lapse in etiquette. Garzel rightly comprehended the implications. In order to put a stop to angry companions, speak up. Since His Excellency Hakoru, my master, has said so, we can only give in. Or do you guys have any other proposals? Gazelle's companions could only shake their heads heavily. The Imperial Army's intelligence service is already on the move, and it's not easy to obstruct the ritual, so the best thing to do is to join forces now. Dorf uttered the decisive words. After that it was just confirmation of the details, followed quickly by the start of the operation. Stimulating Veilgrind was like stepping on a tiger's tail. Even understanding this, the demoness trio were undaunted. Can we get in the way of the ritual by dealing with her? Who knows? Gravity collapses in a state that even I can't maintain. I'm afraid even Veilgrind can't handle the three of us while maintaining the caste, right? That's why I'm so vigilant, because I think she can do it. Really? Gee, I'm serious. Never mind, don't bother. Just play around. With the usual tone of conversation, Testarossa and the others didn't play any tricks either, coming to Veilgrind squarely. Of course, Veilgrind had spotted the three of them as well. But there was no warning at all, rather than letting the trio of demonesses come closer with interest. Greetings, it's a good day for a fight. Testarossa sighed and Veilgrind responded with a smile. Yeah. But before we start, I'd like to ask you a question. If you join my team, you'll be treated well as the primordials. The demoness trio was still calm in front of her. The answer from Testarossa and the girls is of course, no. There is still some karma with the Empire, but allow me to reject this offer. It's the same for us. It's nice to have a master for the first time, but I'm not letting go. Yeah, and more importantly, the words are out of the way, let's get this fight started. If you don't want to go 1-on-3, you can have those behind you join the fight. As if to completely cut off any possibility, a categorical rejection was made. To Carrera, it didn't matter at all what the negotiation or whatever was going on, entirely because the fight had become atmospheric, and seeing Veilgrind's magic up close had stimulated her fighting instincts. Veilgrind smiled. That's your answer, all right. Then let's have a little fun with you guys. This is the signal that the battle is on, light and fluttering. In the presence of Testarossa and others, Veilgrind split. Nope. Like looking in a mirror, Veilgrind became two people. Testarossa had a clue about this phenomenon in her mind. Tough aura then. It's not the same as simply splitting the body, but it's a bit similar to Ryan's all-embracing, right? Testarossa had fought Ryan in the past, and the cause of the dispute had been forgotten, but the combat experience had been gained nonetheless. The all-embracing of Ryan is to divide one's body beforehand, and to have the ability to regenerate any part of one's body, but unlike the other body, consciousness can only be housed in one body. Even so, it can be quite vicious depending on its use, and it's perfect for luring the enemy's attention. Even if it's slightly less useful against prudent opponents, it's still a very powerful ability to use as insurance. But comparing creatures is too bad. From the mere fact that the parallel presence of Veilgrind gave birth to the other body, it cannot be denied that the all-pervading presence is a total disadvantage. Testarossa didn't understand as well as she did, a shadow showing on her beautiful face. What is it? You can spread out your body and regenerate any piece of flesh. I see. That means either one can be considered the main body, right? Yes. Testarossa and others, who were not panicking and analyzing the status quo, had already started the battle and still spoke with such grace. Veilgrind said cheerfully. White Primordial is very clever, and yes, this is one of the powers I hold, parallel existence. I don't want you to interfere with the ceremony, so let me be your opponent. Elegantly slapping the fan, Veilgrind declared. That's not a very funny thing to say to Testarossa. The eyes glared angrily at Veilgrind. I now have the name Testarossa, given to me by my lord, Lord Rimuru, so don't call me Primordial White. She said, casually creating a flaming whip without thinking. The whip twisted like a snake and attacked Veilgrind. There's such a thing as a name for the primordial by the slime. It seems to be true. Uncertain information was affirmed, and Veelgrind was unable to hide her surprise, but she nonetheless dodged the whip's attack with ease and without panic. It is rude to call my lord the slime. The indignant Carrera roared and let out her magic. The starting point is gravity collapse. Reduced in size as much as possible, and thus increasing in power, it was the largest attack that Carrera could muster right now, hitting her directly as Veelgrind's consciousness focused on Testarossa. As if the pitch-black pillar that connected heaven and earth surrounded Veelgrind, the column just happened to hold her, like a prison from which there was no escape. However, Veelgrind smiled generously, a bemused look on her face even in the cage of hypergravity. He is the one who commands demons, and the power of magic is unmistakable. But as long as the laws of the world are followed, it won't work on the dragon race. As if to prove the point, Veelgrind smashed the pillar of darkness from within, raising her own magic to interfere with Carrera's magic, rendering it impotent. Ha ha ha. No less than Lord Veldora's sister, it was almost playful. Since the magic doesn't work, I guess I'm out of options. No, and the swordplay learned from Ajira may not be of much use either, let me try it. While her own trick was broken, Carrera seemed to be still happy and not at all frustrated as she took the sword created by magic and set up a pose. The beautiful Tezu showed a strong aura that was disproportionate to the demon, and Carrera's demon aura flowed into the blade just like that, emitting a radiance. This is the right choice, not just to rely on magic or skill, but to create a skill that can touch the power of the dragon seed, the root of the world. According to Lord Veldora, a woman named Hinata seems to prove it. Without trying, Testarossa already knew that magic wouldn't work on Veelgrind, so she created a whip with magic from the start. The whip is white and has the paradoxical nature of a frozen white flame, a forbidden spell developed by Testarossa. Well, humans are fun, so let's use this. Ultima said as she took out two solidified swords, the bodies of which had a very toxic purple color, wrapped in an extraordinary demonic aura. You're not hiding anything. Those things are the same ones that managed to hurt Zijin, right? Well, to be honest, we always thought there was no point in moving our bodies. I'm surprised that the experience of fighting with Lord Zijin would come in handy in such a way. The women who were good at magic didn't put a lot of importance on melee combat, but when fighting Zijin, there was no other means of attack that worked other than melee combat. Because Zijin had an iron wall-like defense, as well as an absolute advantage against magic, almost all of which didn't work against Zijin, and as a result, they were forced to fumble for other ways to fight. And the answer they came up with is now this. By betting on the existence of a spiritual being to give an attack based on the strong power of the mind, they finally succeeded in hurting Zijin. For spiritual beings, the power of the mind trumps all. Skill is also a form of the power of the mind generated by the desire of each individual, and the ultimate culmination is the ultimate skill. So how close can one's mind get to the point where they conclude it's just a matter of trying? By materializing this idea, you create weapons that you can use while they are still in hand. Zijin's defense was not even inferior to the dragon's ability, and despite this, Ultima's blade still managed to do damage. That is to say, the attack of the demoness trio was even able to touch the probe ability. After learning my weapon, my sword skills are just for fun, but I've got the true legacy of Ajira, let's try it out. Saying that, Carrera quickly ran up. Totally unconcerned with the defense, she makes a full-force chop to Veelgrind. Veelgrind opens the attack with a lupin. A fan made of high-grade feathers could hardly be called a weapon really, but its strength had become even harder than diamond due to the monster aura of Veelgrind. Thin, soft and hard, not at all inferior to Carrera's Taishaku, a weapon that Veelgrind loved to use. It's amazing that you, as a primordial, gave up magic so easily. Is it that surprising? All our glory is but a trifle in order to dedicate victory to our master. As Veelgrind had fallen into a defensive position under Carrera's onslaught, Testarossa took advantage of the momentum to strike with her whip, chasing after her prey like a myriad of white snakes. Geez. Veilgrind smacked her tongue in displeasure. The hem of her skirt was also torn by the whip. Her beautiful jade feet are hidden, and the long red swellings can be clearly seen in them. That's evidence that Testaross's attack worked. Good job, Testa. That's how I'm going to be avant-garde. I'm glad I got hit by a fluke. Even with a minor injury, Veilgrind is still very relaxed, so only in the face of Testarossa and others will he make a major mistake. That is, carelessness. It's not a fluke. The sound of Ultima's words like a boast of triumph was accompanied by an instant of pain in Veilgrind's flank. What? A moment of confusion. As if aiming for this moment, Testarossa's whip and Carrera's sword attacked at the same time. On one knee is Veilgrind. For a moment it was impossible to understand what was happening to her. No, not unintelligible. Rather, they don't want to understand. Hit the jackpot, Ultima. Let's ask Lord Raimuru to collect the reward afterwards. Good fight, but don't be careless, just keep fighting like this. There are other parallel existences, so knock them down and stop the ritual from taking place. Listening to these voices in the distance, Veilgrind stood up. Didn't eating her attack do much damage? It took me a long time to undo your spell. The dragon race is really something. But it's not like you can't be beaten. The damage can accumulate, and so it goes. Before Ultima could finish her sentence, Veilgrind made her move first. With a speed that the three demons possessing super senses couldn't even perceive, she quickly grabbed Ultima's head and pressed it to the ground. Goo-ha! Unable to let out a groan, Veilgrind quickly disengaged from the place after using Ultima as a jumping kick, followed by a late swing at Carrera's chop. After getting out of range of Carrera's attack, Veilgrind drew her flanking knife and threw it aside. Her clothes were still tattered, but the snow-white skin was no longer scarred, as if to prove that the damage done by that barrage of attacks just now was nothing to Veilgrind. Yes, it's a monster. Carrera let out a low chuckle, to which Veilgrind responded in self-deprecating generality. That's not so bad. I'm not mature enough either. It's been a long time since I've been careless enough to get hurt, but it's just that I didn't notice and nothing went wrong. It's the same thing as being the strongest's destiny, you guys can understand that too, right? Veilgrind said with a bitter smile, her eyes sharp, staring closely at Testarossa and the others, not intending to let go of any slightest movement. Don't expect a second carelessness, and thus this moment, the possibility of victory for Testarossa and the others, disappears. The primordials are a rather tricky existence, but it's not from the point of view of a threat, it's too much trouble to use you as an opponent. However, I have changed my mind now that you have gained a name to complete the flesh and become stronger than I thought, and I agree. They are not as powerful as themselves, but it would be very beneficial to have assistance in challenging their sister, Velzado, to become quite powerful. Just like now, Veilgrind took an unexpected attack. If this had happened during the battle with the sister, it would have basically been a declaration of defeat for Veilgrind. The proof was that just now, the attack of Testarossa and the others had succeeded in inflicting damage on Veilgrind's other body. Of course, it will repair on its own after time. However, just like what Carrera had said earlier, for Ultima's spell poison to be lifted, it would take a lot of work even for Veilgrind. So just now, Veilgrind disarmed the damaged other body and divided a new other body to remove all the damage. Such use was the essence of parallel existence, and no matter what primordial must-kill technique it was meaningless in the face of Veilgrind's powers. Only, this power is not all-powerful either. There are still some restrictions on use. The biggest limitation is that in order to divide an other body, one must guarantee it with at least 10% of the amount of mana, which is not used directly by the mana, but maintains 10% of the mana consumption, and when the other body is gone, the mana will return to the body. Therefore, the number of other bodies that can be divided is limited. At most, Veilgrind could only divide 10 other bodies, but if it was divided into 10 people, the amount of mana became 0, and the combat power was instead reduced. All of the other bodies of the mana amount could be used together, so it would be more efficient to leave at least 50% of it, or so Veilgrind thought. Therefore, even more is basically 3 or 4 other bodies. There is one more limitation. That's about the damage that the other body takes. If you dismantle the other body in its intact state, then 10% of the magic element will be returned, and if you are injured, the amount of magic element returned will be reduced proportionately. The way Rimuru thinks about it is, in a sense, correct. In this case, 5 percentage points were consumed. Incidentally, Carrera unleashed the nuclear strike magic that had only been unleashed at full strength, gravity collapse, which Veilgrind needed less than 1% of the mana consumption to release. That's how big the true dragon seed's magic is. As mentioned above, the invincible Veilgrind is not immortal at all. It was pointless to do damage to the flesh, but the amount of mana was being consumed little by little, and it was only a matter of time before it was knocked down. Although the probability was extremely small, Veilgrind still thought of the possibility that, as a few demons in the strongest corner of this world, might be able to defeat her. Although the mouth says it's no threat, it's just a bluff to combat the opponent. Veilgrind was convinced. The Demoness trio used as a trump card against Velzado is useful. If the battle with the elder sister could get the likes of Testarossa to participate in the battle, it would basically be the same as winning. As a result, Veilgrind initiated the invitation again. You understand, don't you? No matter how much you struggle, you won't beat me. Don't you see no point in continuing the fight? With a little assistance, I will guarantee your freedom afterwards, so surrender to me here. The offer, a concession by the self-respecting Veilgrind to the max. But Testarossa and the others expressed their refusal. To betray Lord Rimuru? It's a joke. I'm telling you, you really despise us too much. Isn't it common sense that demons don't renege on their contracts? You won't turn your back because you can't beat them. That is, there are indeed some people among the demons who can negotiate. Just be serious and look for guys who might also act for profit. But it is impossible to make me betray my lord. Each of the three spilled their hearts, and in order to radiate the displeasure in their hearts, they all attacked Veilgrind. This attack, which was full of maximum power, instantly damaged Veilgrind's other body, and Veilgrind consumed another 9% of her mana as a result. Deal, break it off. Is it? I'm sorry, really, I'm sorry. Parting the new other body, Veilgrind let out a low, cruel laugh. And then, the time for ravaging began. Garzel and the others detoured through the true red pillar that rained down the rain of blood, gravity collapse, and prepared to attack the scene where Cagali was performing her ritual. If it got too close, the Knights of the Sky would be caught by the gravity wave, and it was the task of the advance leader, Dorf, to guard the area. Still, it's superfluous to worry about. The gravity collapse maintained by Veilgrind is completely isolated from the surrounding effects. On the ground, the battle between Testarossa and the others and Veilgrind seemed to have begun, but the Pillar of True Red was still alive and well. Grasping this fact, Garzel couldn't help but have a chill on his back, though he didn't show any cowardice and instead shouted. Unbelievable as it may be, that's Veilgrind. To be able to distinguish a clone of the same level as the main body, what else could this be but a nightmare? But fear not, we also have strong reinforcements that break common sense. Garzel's voice conveyed to the knights the middle-spirited majesty and solemnity of the voice, dispelling everyone's sense of terror. Garzel actually felt fear in his heart as well. In the presence of such an overwhelming presence, even the sages had few means they could take, and even if they wanted to resist, the gap in strength was too great. But Garzel didn't give up. The sense of responsibility as a king makes Garzel's heart strong. More importantly, the reinforcements sent by the pampered senior brother had taught him that it was too early to despair. The trio of demonesses who were currently fighting were not as good as Veilgrind based on the amount of mana, but they were still brave enough to challenge their opponent, who was nearly 100 times more powerful. Cuckoo, seeing them like that, how can I, as a king, say anything depressing? Gazel's strong inner vow. And Gazel's enlightenment affected his companions and the knights, and by the time they reached their destination, all the fear in everyone's hearts had disappeared. The pillar of true red reached its destination. It was an open meadow large enough for a large army to dispose of. The ground was stained bright red with blood. This is the end of the road for the hybrid legions of shady deals. There were probably close to 100 people on that land. One of the men in uniform was particularly conspicuous, and that was Lieutenant Kondo. Releasing an overwhelming sense of presence, looking over to Gazel. Others were footmen, Tyr, and more than 30 of Yuki's companions, together with nearly 50 men from the Imperial Emperor's Knights of the Near Guard. They protected Kigali by scattering around in case the ceremony was interrupted. Around Kondo's side, one could also see men in uniform, who were employees of the Intelligence Bureau, and these men were also from the Imperial Emperor's Knights of the Near Guard, which meant that the ones here were basically the group with the strongest fighting power in the Empire. Position-wise, Kigali was on the outer edge of Vielgrind. Bathed in blood and rain, burying their heads in the ritual. Vielgrind, on the other hand, stood on the sidelines as if stationing herself. After spreading out on the other side of the true red dragon, it came to this side in order to avoid the magic being hindered by the trio of demon women. Even if it was Vielgrind, it was too busy to maintain such great magic with just one clone. As a result, Vielgrind didn't look like she was going to make a move either, looking like she was watching from the sidelines. Gazel confirmed the situation overhead. Then, with a laid-back attitude, it began to fall. Up to greet the landed Gazel and others was Kondo. I am honored to meet King Gazel, who has a reputation as a hero. Kondo Tatsuya didn't care to say. Gazel grunted and erected his sword. You are? The head of the Imperial Intelligence Service, Lieutenant Kondo. Funny, you're the information-feeding geek. Funny. I will be your opponent. Draw your sword quickly. Gazel sensed Kondo's strength with a glance, and the moment of confrontation attempted mind-reading to no avail, and that alone was enough to consider him equal to himself. Hey, I'll take care of this. Ben, you just deal with the others and avoid getting in the way. You guys too, this guy can't be handled by anyone but me. Looking at the companions who had co-sponsored the showdown, Gazel spoke up. It was Jane who immediately responded to Gazel's order. That's right, we can't handle that one. At least we have to get rid of those who are in the way so King Gazel can concentrate on his fight. Dorf echoed Jane's judgment. Got it. All hands, listen up. Quantitatively we are more, but do not underestimate the strength of the opponent. Aerial warfare in groups of 5. Seeing the enemy, giving proper instructions. The Knights of the Order are good at the tactics of attacking overhead, but this time, they are using the numerical advantage to mobilize the opponent's battle plan. Whether it is Yuki's companions or the Imperial Emperor's Order of the Near Guard, their strength is comparable to that of the immortal level. The so-called immortal level, when converted according to the threat level set by the free combination, is equivalent to the upper level of the special A level, which can match the strength of the upper magician. If you continue to cultivate, you will be able to reach the Demon Lord's seed, and it is not too much to call it a hero. Dorf's men, together with the others, had finally reached the A level, and Dorf himself had reached the immortal level. Not so much how correct Dorf's judgment was, but a keen sense of the dangers of the enemy's war effort. While the odds are higher than fighting Vielgrind, you can still tell it's hard to do a decent fight. That is why such instructions were given, and their purpose was not to annihilate the enemy. Using the advantage of flying through the air to disrupt the enemy and thus buy time was Dorf's true purpose. In order for Gazel not to be hindered, the Heavenly Knights correctly comprehended this intention and immediately reacted. Believing in His Majesty's victory, I will complete my own mission. Besides, reinforcements will be here soon. Dorf judged so. His judgment was affirmed by a quickening voice. Ha 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 ha. I'm a little late. This big guy is heavier than I thought. It took a lot of work to get here. Get on the big ship and enjoy this battle. It's Gable. Phew. You're so handsome, Gable Summer. Exactly. I'm getting more and more manly. I'll follow you all the way, be aware of it. And Gable's minions. The flying dragon was holding chains in its hands, attached to a huge object. That huge object was the Floor Guardian Colossus statue, which was transported by 100 people by human air. There was nothing wrong with the Floor Guardian Colossus statue waiting for the enemy to arrive in the maze, but to get to the battlefield, the huge body was a bit of a hindrance, although the fighting ability was impeccable, but the movement speed was really slow. But it's quick in close combat, which has been ignored so far. This is a problem that needs improvement. Since it's all moved here, I'll make an effort. Ghidorah shouted with gusto. Now is the time to take credit, and sit down in the Floor Guardian Colossus with all your energy. Ghidorah looked at Kondo and immediately looked away again. Seeing that King Garzel was dealing with it, he felt that it was not his turn to interfere. And then he saw Veilgrind. Is it true that the real face of His Excellency the Marshal is Veilgrind the Scorched Dragon? But if so, Damrada's intentions are lost on people. Has he really sworn his allegiance to His Majesty? Saying something about protecting Masayuki, was it necessary to give such an order to the Bonnie group? I don't get it, but it's not something to worry about now. If Veilgrind does it, the battle is over, and to avoid that, I'll have to keep an eye on it. Thinking about it, Ghidorah fired the Floor Guardian Colossus towards the elegantly standing Veilgrind. Watching Ghidorah walk past, Gable flew to Dorf's side. Lord Ghidorah seems intent on dealing with Lord Veilgrind. We'll do what we're supposed to do and we'll get rid of all the people who get in the way. Oh, you're so reliable, Lord Gable. Then let's fight together. My team will rush ahead, and the reinforcements will be yours. Understood. Gable and Dorf nodded at each other. As promised, the flying dragons, with their excellent fighting ability, were the main force. If it was a dragon race with excellent defenses, it wouldn't be so easy to be killed, plus Gable and others would be unstinting in their use of full recovery potions. As long as they weren't instantly dead, they would be able to fully recover, just right for a meat shield. Then, Sir Dorf, the command is in your hands. Wait a minute. Now, without first discussing it, did Gable's action take Dorf by surprise? Ha. I am Gable, the Dragon King. Let's go for it. Not taking Dorf's appearance to heart either, Gable launched a blitz directly at what looked like a group of Kondo's cronies, one of the men. With Gable like this, Gobia could only stare blankly. They got here last, because they were running on the ground, and it couldn't be helped. But after all, it was a speed equivalent of A-grade strength, so it was barely able to get there before the war started. Not only that, but it went around nicely to the back of the enemy forces in accordance with combat requirements. Gable Summer is going alone, so that man's strength is outstanding. Hearing Gobia's comment, the man beside her offered a retort. Yeah? Doesn't it look like you're just a weak-eyed kid who's good for clerical work? For some reason, Phobio the Panther-Tooth, of the three beastmen of Carrion, has not returned to his country, but has come with Gobia. Gobia, though happy in heart, now led the Kuranai and had to be serious in official duties, so began to admonish Phobio to be careful. Sir Phobio, your strength is indeed praiseworthy, but it is necessary to exercise your eye for the strength of the enemy. How poignant, Gobia. Don't call me Sir Phobio. This is a combat operation. Please distinguish between public and private. This conversation between the two, which seems to the ministry to be actually flirting, is clearly a battlefield full of tension, but somehow has a gentle atmosphere. So, what happens after that? Phobio asked seriously with his suddenly changed expression. Gobia also cheered up and replied. We're here to bide our time. Nowadays, it is no longer possible to achieve the conditions for tactical victory, and combat has failed. Based on Lord Veilgrin's change of action, there is a chance that we could be swept under the rug. If one is only thinking about survival, one should be single-mindedly running away, but right now we cannot make that choice. In short, the key is to reduce the number of people who get in the way as much as possible and to ease the burden on His Majesty Rimuru. That is the expression of good awareness. If Veilgrin stayed here, then Rimuru would be able to take advantage of the opportunity to crush Emperor Rudra. Or forcing the other side to accept an armistice is the key to this fight. But the battle collapsed the moment Veilgrin took out the clone, and all operations should have been interrupted immediately at that moment, except that those who had the power to decide could not be contacted now. Gable is now the supreme person present. And Gable made the decision to continue the fight. Testarossa and others agreed, and Gobia did not disagree. Do what you can on your own, that's all. Exactly how many other bodies Veilgrin would be able to divide is unclear, but the awareness to stall this is already there, and then if possible, try to stop the ritual that Kigali is performing. Do you want to kill yourself? No, His Majesty Rimuru will never allow us to die, so, no sacrifice is allowed, no one. With this unreasonable command, the Kurenai nodded silently. If Veilgrin made her move, there was no way to stop her, was there? Then give it to His Excellency Ghidorah and we'll run away. After answering, Gobia blinked a single eye lightly. The look was devastating enough to shut Phobio up. All right. I didn't want to complicate it so much, just messed with him a little. It seems there's some karma in there, too. How can we not say hello? Phobio had tasted miserable failure in the past by being duped by Footman and Tyr, but that was all because he was too immature to resent them either. Rather, it's a food that also gains growth and even a little thanks to them. He was the beast kind of man who was simply happy. It was precisely because Phobio was such a person that seeing his nemesis being manipulated gave him something to think about. Don't force it. I can't make this deal, but I swear I'll try to stay alive. With these words, Phobio joined the war. Lieutenant Kondo confronted King Gazelle, the glasses-wearing intelligence agent who was targeted by Gable. Ben and Henrietta, on the other hand, went to deal with Footman and Tyr, Phobio, who had broken in, and Gobia, who was intent on seeing the situation. In front of Veilgrin, who was sweeping the battlefield, was Ghidorah Sensei, who manipulated the Floor Guardian Colossus statue. And with that, the respective battles began. In the midst of the battlefield, Gazelle's heart was calm. Not as a king, but as a martial artist, a swordsman, in a confrontation with Kondo. Kondo Tatsuya said, drawing his military knife. Seeing the way Gazelle's sword was raised, he couldn't help but sigh. Tease, that's beautiful. The sword sage doesn't look like he's a fool. It was by no means a polite remark, a genuine compliment, but Gazelle snorted in response. Don't be ridiculous. It's just sarcasm to hear you say that. This is also true. The reason why is because Kondo's frame is also so beautiful that even Gazelle can't find a break at all. The current Kondo was holding the saber in both hands. Unlike the fight with Footman, there was no slack in the stance. And even more surprising, the two were exactly the same as if they had made a date. After several rounds of silent sparring, the two have largely grasped each other's strength, so it is no coincidence that they are already convinced of the same frame. Gazelle's sword skills were learned from Hakoru, and there were also some unique sword skills woven into them, but the basic stance was still faithful to Hakoru's teaching. Hakoru's Maizuru sword art was inherited from his grandfather, Akari Byakuya. No one other than Hakoru passed on the genre. Even Gazelle, who was a direct disciple, did not have a full grasp of the Maizuru, and he knew very well that there were mysteries that he had never seen. However, in the land of monsters, Hakoru was responsible for training soldiers as an instructor, and of course he would teach them the basics of swordsmanship, but it was hard to imagine that swordsmanship would spread from there to the Empire. After all, Sword skills were not something that could be mastered overnight. So, Gazelle asked for the exit. Coincidentally, Kondo asked the same question. That style, why do you know Maizuru? I always thought it was possible that His Majesty's sword skills were similar to my Maizushin lifestream. Who did you learn this from? The duo stared at each other. The first to speak was Gazelle. The Maizushin lifestream, are you saying that it's different from the Maizushin? Kondo faced expressionlessly as he listened to the question and pondered it in his mind. In the Dwarven Kingdom, the combination of a one-handed sword and a shield is the mainstream orthodox swordplay, so it seems that the existence of a certain magical creature with great swordplay skills is linked to this information. There was little intelligence, but Kondo was basically close to the right answer. Faced with such a Kondo, Gazelle asked, as if anxious. Aren't you going to answer my question? Don't worry about it yet. Maizuru is probably the same genre as the one I studied, so I'm asking, is it possible that the same genre can be derived by chance in this world? Too. Muttering, Gazelle recalled. While cultivating, he had heard about old grandfather Byakuya. My master, His Excellency Hakoru, has heard that his grandfather taught him the Maizuru. It's said that his grandfather was a visitor from the other world, so that explains it. Unbeknownst to both Gazelle and Kondo, Akari Byakuya had a younger brother, who had become the originator of the Keikyo sect in place of his older brother, and who taught the Maizushin lifestream in the world where Kondo was born. Fighting monsters and spirits as a sword to exorcise them. Kondo was also one of those who fought against the monsters and learned the Maizushin lifestream. In a position close to the source stream. Kukaku, it's funny to be in the same family. Kondo smiled cheerfully, a rare occurrence. He never shows any emotion in his life, but this smile highlights his coldness. I have a proposal, Your Majesty, Gazelle. What? Fellowship. With His Majesty Gazelle's strength, he is strong enough to join the Empire. If you can swear to disarm and serve our Emperor, I promise you I will stop all aggression against your country. Do you think I will accept your proposal? Yes, I will. It's the best way to reduce casualties. Kondo was right, thought Gazelle. This was a desperately needed proposal, and it was only right to accept it if the people of the Dwarven Kingdom were to be protected. As monarchs, one should not be bitter, one should accept. Now that the threat of Veilgrind was known, there was no way to win. This battle, originally, had no clearly defined conditions for absolute victory. Before inflicting heavy casualties, Rimuru and the others would go head-to-head with Rudra, and that optimistic speculation is all there is to it. If it's for the people's sake. Thinking about it, Gazelle smiled as if he had thrown away his confusion. Ridiculous. You think you've already won. It seems you don't know that you've lost Kondo. See how I correct you for your arrogant thoughts. Shouting, Gazelle focused his thoughts on the enemy in front of him. The sage's dominance has been fully liberated by the unity of mind, body and spirit with the sword. What unfolded there was a heroic pose that was close to reaching the awakening demon lord. Nevertheless, Kondo remained calm at the sight of such a Gazelle. It's a pity that the so-called Sage King is just a name. Then there's no other way. I'll take care of you before your reputation goes down the drain. These words are the signal for war between the saints. A few minutes passed. Kondo is starting to get the upper hand. The heroic hegemony released by Gazelle was easily counteracted by Kondo, and by winding the hegemony, all the effects were nullified. Even if you look at pure swordplay, Kondo is able to use his dexterous body movement to counterattack with a blinding wind and thunder, and then he can use his fastest assault technique, the purple electric surge, while Gazelle is able to use a running water chopper to break up his attack. The same kind know each other too well. Slowly, Gazelle's counterpart gradually became slower, acquiring more sword skills or Kondo. Indeed, there is a sword skill that is not passed down from the Maizushin lifestream, but even I, who is close to my bloodline, can't grasp the full picture. I'm still wondering how far the monster has come to understand the essence of the sword. That was Kondo's honest opinion. But this was in no way a despise for Hakuru. The sword path is profound and unending. Kondo says this because he is proud of his genre. But this angered Gazelle. Is this an insult to my master? Gazelle glared at Kondo even more imposingly. And then, there was one more. I say, Lord Gazelle, it's easy to lose your mind on the battlefield, it's not enough to cultivate. I'll take your place for a while, and you stay here and calm down. Hakuru, who led the follow-on troops as Gobia's counselor, arrived belatedly. Kondo could see through Hakuru's strength at a glance. The next moment, a fierce clash of clear sound sounded between the steel, and Kondo unleashed a divinely fast Kyuri chop, which Hakuru took with his hidden sword. Tease. Can you catch that? The third eye or sky eye on Hakuru's forehead opened its eyes. This skill had now broken through the realm of special skills and was about to go beyond the realm of unique skills. That's why he was able to cope with Kondo's battling. It's not a miracle that my grandfather is the same as that grandfather, but it's a miracle. Kid, if you think I'm a magical creature, how much do you understand the true essence of the sword? Then see for yourself. Oh, funny. Now that you've said that, I'll teach you how much you can afford. And just like that, under the watchful eyes of Gazelle, Kondo and Hakuru began to battle it out. Kondo had the odds in his mind. Hakuru did have strength, he could see it at a glance. However, the fact that the so-called magical creature did not understand the nature of the sword was indisputable to Kondo. Why? Because the Maizushin life stream is the sword of exorcism. A sword skill that could be considered a natural enemy to a magical creature, one that was impossible to learn in the form of a magical creature. It was only natural that Kondo would think so. Moreover, who could have imagined that the true founder, the elder brother of the founding fathers of the Maizushin life stream, had come to this world? It's a bit beyond imagination to be able to use even the mystical arts, but none of the skills above the secret arts are passed on except for the bloodline of the family. I don't know how capable that so-called otherworlder is, but it's impossible to pass on the secret mysteries to magical creatures. Kondo had made a judgment based on his own common sense, and in a sense there was nothing he could do about it. It was actually a very big mistake, and Kondo had a hard time thinking about it. That's a big price to pay. As Hakuru and Kondo faced each other and stepped into the must-kill distance, the two of them simultaneously used their aura, Plum Blossom, Wuhuatu. Kondo gambled on the glory of the swordsman, revealing his own long-exercised sword skills. It was precisely because Hakuru was a fellow student that he made such an unwise move. In one corner of his head, he was calmly thinking about finishing the matter with his real skills, but when he started to move, he became serious about winning and losing. Such a move was not in keeping with the usual calm and collected style of Kondo, who actually intended to show his martial prowess to his fellow students in this world through the strongest sword skill he had ever learned. The so-called Wuhuatu, the stabbing technique that symbolizes the plum blossom, is the highest peak of Kondo's learned sword skills and is one of the secret mysteries that is not passed down. The key points of the human body are the eyes, throat, heart, kidneys, heart, belly, hips, and shoulders for fainting. Even among fellow swordsmen, there were very few who had learned this secret mystery, and it was a miscalculation to meet Hakuru here. Yahashij's cherry blossoms. He chose the supreme power, the continuous slashing like a flowing stream, with different combinations, and he hit the enemy 8 times in a row. Between Kondo and Hakuru, the difference in fighting ability was huge, even though the skills were comparable. According to Hakuru's judgment, Kondo's physical abilities were at least tens of times greater than Hakuru's. So, if this sword move didn't work, it was basically a judgment that Hakuru had lost the battle. Hiding this realization in his heart, Hakuru drew his sword and cut it out. Look. Tease. Kondo scored a landslide victory. Hakuru was going to give Kondo a death blow even though he was going to die together. But in the end, the results obtained were not what either had in mind. With a speed that was difficult for onlookers to see, Hakuru's sword spread out like 8 petals, but all of them were offset by the 5 petals symbolized by Kondo, and the attack ultimately missed. Kondo dodges back halfway to his feet, which is a bit of a scrape on his cheek, but that's out of Kondo's expectation. I didn't think there was a swordsman in this world who was above me. The fact that Hakuru's 8 Hua Flash was an even more advanced sword skill than Kondo's 5 Hua Tan shattered Kondo's perception all along and had to admit that he was wrong. However, it was Kondo who got the victory. Counteracting the must-kill sword technique was indeed wonderful, but this was because the power gap was so great that Hakuru's arms were completely unusable due to the miserable split of the sword blade clash just now. Even the strongest of the powers will not reach you. No, that's enough. I'm sorry for looking down on you, but I'd like to ask you your grandfather's name, too. Kondo apologized for despising Hakuru as a magical creature, and offered a tribute by admitting that he was a swordsman above himself. He was a true man about swordsmanship. But at the same time, no judgment of things is influenced by affection. This is Tatsuya Kondo. Funny, my grandfather's name was Akari Byakuya, and he was a great swordsman, but he was already in the ground. Unfortunately, Akari is the name of my family. Perhaps he is related to the master of the Maizushin lifestream, and if he can at least reach the level of an immortal, he will be one of the most powerful in the world. Kondo said a silent and simple prayer. Really a man who is extremely serious about his genre. The elder Hakuru looked at Kondo's movements in amazement and tried to ask. Grandfather was a strange man and thought it was good to live naturally. Can you guys just pull back on this? Sensing that Kondo held a certain respect for himself, Hakuru tried the offer, but it was still rejected. I will guarantee your personal safety, but the war cannot be stopped. In my proposition, halfway through is the least desirable. Kondo said coldly. Yeah, that's right, too, thought Hakuru. Hakuru wasn't in a hurry. I've already predicted that I'll lose, so it's impossible for these hands to return to combat, but the goal has been achieved. That's right, Hakuru's goal wasn't to gain victory, but to show Gazelle the battle between himself and Kondo. If it was the sword Saint Gazelle Dworgen, one should be able to understand it just by looking at Hakuru's Aoyi, although it couldn't be learned immediately, one could certainly gain some inspiration. That's what Hakuru thought. What's more, Kondo had also used the Aoyi a while ago, and by doing so, Gazelle's winning percentage would definitely increase as well. Then I will stop here, for I do not wish to be disgraced in this way. In the last days, I intend to take as many enemy troops as possible with me. It's just that it's not time yet, so let's focus on healing these hands now. Hakuru's hands were heavily wounded so that they couldn't even be recovered with a full recovery medicine. The destruction of the object through the infiltration of the fighting chi was the ultimate meaning of the chi fighting method, and Kondo's fighting chi broke through the Hakuru's defenses, so Hakurus had no other choice but to neutralize the treatment through his own demonic chi. However, Hakuru still looked at Gazelle with a bland expression. All right, King Gazelle, have you calmed down? Of course, I'm excited to see my master's sword skills. I don't want to teach it, but I can't say it now, so I'll leave it to you. Leave it to me. After Hakuru stepped back, Gazelle stepped in front of Kondo. On the other hand, Hakuru was out of the fray with his head held high if he had completed his task. Again, Kondo clinches up with Gazelle. Although Kondo shamed himself for being shallow, he switched moods anyway. I've lost my cool a little bit, play is over, I'm back to work now. Ha! Although it was not the intention, I also shared it. I must repay my master's expectations. Let me do my best. Whether it was Kondo or Gazelle, it was different from what it was before. Having long since tested the strength of the opponent, it is now the real opening fight. Gazelle was grateful to Hakuru. If he fought Kondo as he did just now, he would definitely lose the battle. Kondo's secret mystery, the Wuhuatu, was impossible to defend against at first sight. Even if one could miraculously avoid a fatal injury, the inside of the body would definitely be as injured by the fighting chi as Hakuru and become unable to fight. It's amazing that a refined fighting chi could have such a threat. I know it's the ultimate meaning of chi dujutsu, but it seems I don't really understand what it's about. As he did his introspection, Gazelle felt his emotions running high right now. Because of the perception that you can become stronger again. Kondo. Feel the full power of myself. After saying that, Gazelle liberated himself from the spell. The genie calls. Come, nameless Earth Spirit King. Gazelle, who has liberated the power of the sage, has taken up residence with the Earth Spirit King, who has been summoned. However, Kondo was unfazed. Ridiculous. He felt Gazelle's domineering attitude, but he said it blandly. Not caring about the words, Gazelle wordlessly placed his sword in front of his upright eyes and focused his attention, condensing his fighting chi so that it flowed into his sword. The huge energy that had been generated after the sameness with the Earth Spirit King had now been perfectly harnessed by Gazelle, a feeling that had not been there for a long time. He's worthy of being a master, and it made me realize the ultimate meaning. I can win, and if I were me now, I'd be able to reach even greater heights. Gazelle felt the improvement in mind, skill and body. Heart, i.e., skills. The unique skill dictator was fully mastered, making Gazelle's energy full of power. Technique, i.e., skill. The Maizuru learned from Hakuru has a technique to turn chi power into physical power through the Chido method. If it was the current Gazelle, it should be able to integrate the energy flowing through the body very well. And this is it, the body. In other words, the unique skill dictator unifies energy and sublimates the attack into the highest and strongest blow. The sword that no one could beat, with such aura, Gazelle moved. Godspeed slam. However, it failed to run into Kondo. A small sound rang out and Gazelle bent his knees. Ka. Gazelle spat blood out of his mouth and looked dumbfounded at the blood coming out of his abdomen. Kondo's right hand held a large Southern-style automatic pistol, the muzzle of which was still smoking, from which the murderous bullet that had defeated Gazelle had been fired. You are an honorable swordsman. Gazelle, his expression twisted by anger and humiliation, spat blood and spoke. But those words fell on deaf ears to Kondo. Like I said, play is over. There's no need for glory on the battlefield. My job is to do whatever it takes to win. Kondo's tone was extremely cold. Compared to Kondo, who was stuck to his own genre, he was a different person. Bullshit. How could I end up like this? Gazelle tried desperately to get up, but the body was no longer obedient and could only fall to the ground again. And that's par for the course. Kondo used not ordinary bullets, but special bullets that were infused with his own ideas, spell bombs. It wasn't an ability borrowed from Emperor Rudra, it was Kondo's own probing ability. That's right. Kondo had awakened the ultimate skill by his own power, and the King of Execution is in charge of the battle. So, very strong. Though a man, he desires to take the seat of the gods, to replace the Emperor Rudra, the man of battle. And the domination spell bomb was one of Kondo's King of Execution powers, secretly concealing the effect of destroying the other party's magical circuitry, which could kill even spiritual lifeforms. Gazelle was definitely not weak, rather he was one of the few strong men in this world. Depending on the situation, perhaps even an awakening demon lord could win. But between Kondo and him lies a high wall that cannot be crossed. That is, whether or not they have an ultimate skill. This alone, before the start of the war, had already decided the winner. Give up your futile efforts. I have no intention of killing His Majesty Gazelle, but I'll let you go when it's over, even though I'll bind you now, Kondo said blandly. While not falsehoods, they are not all true either. Before letting him go, he was going to use the domination spell bomb to dominate him. Now Kagali was at the helm, and for Gazelle, too, he was intended to be captured alive. Terrible coldness and reasonableness, which is also in the bones of Tatsuya Kondo as a man. Hakuru couldn't act now. Witnessing Kondo's formidable strength, he could only stand resignedly. From this moment on, Kondo has basically determined victory. Ha 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 ha. I am Gable, the Dragon King. Let's fight it out. Seeing the enemy, Gable left his men behind and launched the assault himself. As a commander, this act was very inappropriate, but again tactically it's hard to say he was wrong. To say why, it is because the enemy is so powerful that it stands out. The spectacle-wearing minor man, who was not prominent in the enemy group, Gable shouted directly without confusion. "It's you, the man over there, come out and be my rival." Gable nodded at him with his spear pointed at him, and the eyed man snorted with a crooked lip. "It's a pain in the ass. I've never been able to play an ordinary intelligence agent who's been targeted by someone who can see through his strength," the elegant man said as he removed his glasses. In an instant, the feeling the man gave off changed. "In that case, there's nothing you can do, so let me be your opponent. Until then, please leave this place." The usual cowering look disappeared completely, and he gave orders to his companions around him. But that didn't work with the confused companions. "Oi oi Malcolm, aren't you unfit to fight?" "Yeah, we're weaker than we are, so don't try to be strong." The man known as Malcolm replied with a smile to his companions who had come over worriedly. It's really a very comfortable workplace. I'm a single-digit eighth, so you should understand what that means, right?" Seeing that the atmosphere of his peers had changed, everyone understood that Malcolm was just pretending to be a good old intelligence agent, and that he had the authority to give orders to himself, which was what the words just said meant. Understood? Good luck. Leaving these words behind, Malcolm's companions scattered. Malcolm sighed, those slender, serpent-like eyes looking up at Gable. Gable's strength, Malcolm had actually seen through. In a world where it makes no sense to challenge a prominent individual with a group, it is because Malcolm is familiar with this truth that he drives away those whose strength reaches the near-guard knight. "Your name is Gable, look what you've done. If you take away my job, you'll have to pay for it with your life." Ha 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 ha. Single digits is what Lord Rimuru said about dangerous people, and I'm lucky to have such a prey. Gable happily obliged. Thus, the battle between the two males began. The absence of distinct features is the hallmark of Malcolm. It was 800 years ago that Malcolm became a Knight of the Near Guard. Because of his unique skill of infiltrating a special type of disguiser, he was seen by the then head of the group, Damrada. One of the special points of the unique skill disguiser is the ability to change into a person you've seen before. Instead of being rewritten like Hinata's unique skill usurper, it's completely mimicked into the same person. But there is a limit to imitation after all, and the impossibility of imitating all the same for beings whose strength greatly exceeds one's own is the weakness of this ability. Even so, the more powerful people one encounters, the more versatile they become, and so Malcolm survived the great upheaval to become a saint and climb into the single-digit position. This is what happened 100 years after Malcolm became a Knight of the Near Guard. It was because of this that Malcolm was unable to wipe away the fear of Kondo. Kondo is a visitor from the otherworld and has a soul that is stronger than normal, but even so, his power is incomprehensible. The first person to initiate a serial scramble towards Kondo was Malcolm. In that battle, Malcolm came into contact with Kondo's unusually powerful. In the past, he had always thought that Kondo was only being favored by the Emperor, but this battle had made him realize that it was all a misunderstanding. With Kondo's fighting ability, which could not be imitated by Malcolm's unique skill, the disguiser, Kondo simply subdued the powerful man from above and took the position of the leader. Even though Malcolm looked like the monster's four horsemen, Kondo had beaten them down with a bemused look on his face. Because of these things, Malcolm admired Kondo. Kondo cared about the lieutenant's position so much that Malcolm learned that he let himself stay on as a second lieutenant and stayed in the intelligence bureau so he could assist Kondo. In front of Malcolm, there was now a strong enemy, Gable. Although he came out with a spear, he understood that he could not win by this alone. So, Malcolm decided to morph into the gesture of the man he thought was the strongest. Pulling away from Gable, Malcolm shifted into the mold of Kondo, with the unique skill of the disguiser and the power of substitution granted by the Emperor's loan. The Malcolm now has the strength of a man close to Kondo. Oh, that's weird. Is that what you're supposed to look like? Mimicking Kondo's stance, Malcolm replied to Gable. No, this pose is the imitation form of the strongest man I believe in most. Although the four horsemen are strong, they are not as strong as Lieutenant Kondo, now. Malcolm glanced at the battlefield next to him and continued. Even His Majesty Gazelle, who has a reputation as a hero, is at his wits' end. Hearing this, Gable muttered. Whether it was the poor state of the friendly forces' battle, Hakuru's disengagement from the battle line, or the fact that King Gazelle was pointed out to be fighting bitterly, it was already clear through the wide range of magic sense. It seems so. From the moment Lieutenant Kondo struck, our victory was established. That's why you don't want to show off your own moves on purpose, and you don't know where they'll leak out. Don't you want to hide your power too? Malcolm asked the question lightly, turning the gun in his hand into a saber. The legendary equipment loaned to Malcolm can now change form at will according to Malcolm's will. Malcolm, who had picked up the saber in Kondo's likeness, looked majestic and solemn in that stance. Gable still held the magical weapon that could be described as the treasure of the lizard man race, the water vortex spear. It was now in his perfect hands, the spear his father had entrusted to him. Gable had fought many times with this spear. If the weapon was damaged, look for Kurobi to redo it. The performance was only of the trait level, but he was a very reliable partner. Only, after all, it's still not legendary. The poor performance of the weapon would be a key factor in determining victory or defeat, and this time it could be an overwhelming disadvantage for Gable. However, Gable also had the move Dragon Scale Armor, which was almost mythical in defense strength. The enemy, Gable thought to himself, was a saint, on the same level as his awakened self. That's why Gable didn't spare any effort to mount a challenge from the start. So, can this man break through the defenses of our kind? Gable is confident in his defensive capabilities. There is no way to win a battle without delivering a decisive blow to your opponent, no matter how many times you are hit. As long as it doesn't inflict a mortal wound, it is meaningless. Although Gable didn't think Malcolm's weapons could break through his own defenses, he should not be careless and watch his opponent's movements carefully. I'm ready. Well, come on. Gable's misfortune was that the matchup with Malcolm came too soon. The power gained by the awakening was huge, but he had yet to fully grasp it. Just as Ultima had worriedly done, even before the evolution, Gable hadn't been able to harness the magic element well, but now that he had gained such a great power, he was too big to use it well. Highly powerful defense and healing power, those two alone were very powerful, but this time the opponent was too strong. Plum Blossom, Wuhuatu. Whirlpool Water Strike. It was because of prudent correspondence that Gable survived. In terms of strength, the two sides are similar and perhaps Gable is slightly stronger. However, in terms of technique, Malcolm is far stronger than Gable. In fact, Malcolm can't even imitate most of Lieutenant Kondo's strength, and he can't reproduce his ultimate power, the King of Execution. Malcolm itself is comparable in strength to Gable, and Gable is undoubtedly stronger from a defensive standpoint. Winning or losing is often related to timing. What appeared to be a complete victory for Malcolm was actually only a hair's breadth away from victory. Well, I can't make fun of Major General Farragut. You're Gable, the Dragon King. You can't be mistaken for Veldora. Malcolm looked at Gable, who had fallen to the ground. Gable's fate seems to be coming to an end at this moment. Brother. As if to protect Gable, several silhouettes blocked in front of Malcolm. It was Sokka who rushed over. And Gable's minions. Lord Gable. Don't die, Gable. Exactly. Lord Gable is not a man who would die in a place like this. Although they understood that they couldn't win against Malcolm, they stood firm. It was this courage that saved Gable's life. Although everyone is not as strong as the Saint Malcolm, they are all strong people who have reached the specialer level, and they are not spared to use the medicine to buy time, and they are trying desperately to buy time. However, the attack used by the Malcolm, who imitated Kondo, would damage the enemy's interior with the condensed fighting chi, and the recovery pill would become ineffective as a result, so Soka and the others had to be prepared to die in order to be aware of it. Another one of Gable's men has fallen. Then it was Soka's turn for her men, Nansao, to fall, and although the gap in combat skills was not large, the difference in basic strength was too great. Coupled with the fact that Malcolm's weapons were legendary, one after another fell in the face of this inexorable battle power gap. Fortunately, no one has been sacrificed yet. Gable, who was evolved by Rimuru, also made the people under the genealogy stronger, thus increasing endurance and being barely able to avoid fatal injuries. But because of the continuous damage caused by Malcolm, it was also true that it was impossible to return to the front line, and it was only a matter of time before everyone was killed. Thinking about this, Gable shouted, "That's enough. That's enough. Run. Soka, this is an order, get everyone out of here now." Gable tried desperately to lift himself up and looked at the girl. But Soka didn't look at Gable at all, instead she replied with a fearless smile. "I refuse, brother. I am under Lord Sue's command and have no obligation to obey my brother's orders." "Say what?" "Say it again. If we escape here, there's a real chance that someone will die. You're going to die, aren't you?" Soka, who was normally calm, couldn't think about shouting so much now. Gable was speechless and confused. "What are you talking about? It's the commander's job to sacrifice as little as possible, isn't it your job to abandon those of us who have already been defeated and increase the number of survivors as much as possible?" Gable was having a hard time even trying to stand up now, looking at his fighting companions and making a sound, and what he said was overruled by Soka. "Then I'm right in my fight. Our fellow soldiers don't have the kind of weaklings who get killed by seconds with a single blow, which is why they buy time like this." Even as their companions were falling, they continued to fight, relying on numbers to harass Malcolm. Beware of casualties. Look for winning opportunities in this way. What a stupid thing to do. The assurance that help will come is simply. The subordinates led by Rimuru had now gone to the imperial capital and they could not expect support at all, and even if the sleeping subordinates woke up, they could not have rushed over for support by that coincidence. The trio of dependent demonesses, now in the midst of a battle with the formidable foe Vielgrind, were the ones in need of reinforcements, unable to seek their assistance. Gable understood all of this, and that's why he thought that the current situation could only lead to a retreat. However, Gable's minions also denied him. "It's you, Gable. It's you we're waiting for." "Yes, Lord Gable. That's a little bit of a wound. Get up." "Exactly. Buy time and wait for Lord Gable's resurrection. There's no other way for the whole crew to be saved except that." Hearing this, Gable felt ashamed. Only oneself, giving up the victory. "Okay. You, try to hold on until I get up," Gable exclaimed, knowing full well how unreasonable this order was, and the hot tears streaming down his eyes were a good indication of Gable's mood at the moment. He who perseveres, the goddess of victory will not abandon him either. The man who had responded to Gable appeared. Oops, still so messed up. Let me help you with this. It's my lady's order not to let the important toy, Lord Gable, die, so I will come to the rescue." Ultima's men, Veyron and Zonda, had arrived at an unknown time. "I feel like it's harder to live," Zonda muttered afterwards, but it was a happy thing that Gable didn't hear, drowning in the sounds of the battlefield. The butler of the wind, Veyron, came to Soka's side, and then set up his cane towards Malcolm. "If I am to be this man's opponent, I will ask His Excellency Soka to assist me. The other wounded will need your protection." "Understood. So, go." Hearing Soka's response, Veyron began to act. The Marquis-level demon male Veyron, whose amount of magical element was probably less than a quarter of Malcolm's, whose fighting skills were stronger than Veyron's, had managed to force Malcolm to hurry even if he couldn't win. Geez, what a pain in the ass. One after the other before being killed off completely. Of course, it is our mission to grasp the power of the enemy. Oops, I didn't think it would be so irritating to be imitated in a field I'm good at. Get rid of you guys fast, and get that troublemaker. Something's broken. While dealing with Veyron, Malcolm unleashed his killing intent on Gable. This moment of breakthrough, Soka did not let up, deliberately shouting out her voice to draw the other party's attention, as a way to confuse Malcolm. If the cast bitter nothing hits, that's fine. Even if it doesn't, Veyron's sword will attack Malcolm. Malcolm saw through the tricks and made the best choice. That is, to take the bitterness directly, rather than choosing to avoid it. That was right. Reacting to Soka would result in heavier damage from Veyron's side. The next moment, Malcolm just continued to ignore the pale light and flicked away Veyron's cane. And then also reflecting on the fact that you shouldn't be thinking superfluous things in battle. Geez, just knock these guys down before you kill him. Trouble, trouble. Gable was definitely the most dangerous opponent, so Malcolm wanted to kill him as quickly as possible, and was too greedy to do so. It wasn't a major injury, but he still couldn't forgive himself for being injured in Kondo's position. Let's get this over with. So, can you do it? Sir Veyron, he's a hard-ass, isn't he? Yeah. I'll just finish my work in no hurry.